In this quick tutorial, we'll be going over this Unreal Blueprint setup that checks if our character is crouched. It checks if anything's above us to let us know when it's safe to stand up. So if we see that in action, we have this lower object right here. If we hold down Control, we crouch. If we let go of Control outside of that, we just automatically stand up as expected. However, if we're underneath this and we let go of crouch, so I've already let go of that, we're not going to collide and get stuck with our ceiling here. It's not actually going to stand up until we leave that area, and then we speed up and we stand up, and it's just business as usual. So this is very useful. It's expected in games these days to have this kind of functionality, and I'm going to go over every single step in Blueprints to get this working in a very efficient way. So we're going to start in our first person character, and you can see this is where I have our crouch event. So I'm just going to go over every step individually. So let's start here with the enhanced input. So we have an input action. If you're not familiar with Unreal's input action system, I have some tutorials on that, or just Google it. I'm sure you'll find something. But basically we have this input action, which is my left control. And this is where we're starting the crouch logic. So when we are started, that's when the button is first pressed. This is only going to fire one time. It is going to do a few things. So let's just go through sequentially here and make sense of this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set a variable. So we have our variables here. You can just create a new variable as a Boolean, and I called this one can player jump. So this is just a simple thing. When I crouch, I don't want to be able to jump. So if I clicked this on, let's go back to our game. I can crouch and I can press spacebar, and even when I'm crouching, I'm going to jump up. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's why I created this variable here. So we're going to set that to the player cannot jump. This is mirrored over in my jump logic, just up here. Oh, sorry, that's jump land. Here we go, jump input. Before my character jumps, it just checks. Can the player jump? Okay, true, then jump. If not, don't do anything. All right, so that's what this is, just simply telling the player we can't jump. After that, we're referencing the character movement, and we're setting the max walk speed. So to get this, all you have to do is you could just type in character movement. And actually you could type in get character movement, and there you go, get character movement. And from here, set max walk speed, if I can spell that right. So that's all we're doing there. All right, so we're getting the character movement and we're setting the max walk speed. This is just slowing our character down. If we go to our first person character here, if you were to type in walk speed, you can see that our default max walk speed is 400 centimeters a second. And simply we're just fourthing that. So we're just setting it to 100. So we've slowed down, and then we're going into a timeline. So this isn't necessary. This is just how we get a smooth transition from standing to crouching. So if we play our game, you could see there is a bit of an animation. We don't just jump straight away to crouching. And the way we do that is you right click and you can search for timeline, and you can add a timeline. And that's what I've done here. I just called that timeline timeline underscore crouch. And if I were to double click on this, it's just a very, very simple curve. We start at the time 0, so 0 seconds, and we have a value of 96. Why is it a value of 96? I'll show you in just a second. And then after that, we go forward to the second keyframe. This is a time of 0.3, which is the full length of this timeline, and we have a value of 48. So basically, at the beginning, we're going from 96 to 48. Where did I get those numbers? Well, what we're doing with that timeline is we are setting the capsule half height. So how did I get this? Well, let's just look at our character here. We have something called our capsule component. This is a collision cylinder, all right? And if you search for half, you can see the capsule half height. This is basically the height, as I understand it, halfway up the capsule. So this setting the capsule half height is basically shrinking or lengthening the capsule. So by default, it's 96. So if you remember, our timeline starts at 96. So we start just default, and we're shrinking this down to 48. So if we go back to our event graph, we are setting the capsule half height. So to get this, just drag your capsule component and you can go set half height, all right? So again, if we look in our 3D viewport, we have our capsule, and in the details panel for the capsule, that's just one of the parameters here. So anything that's a parameter, we can set it logically in our graph. So we're just getting the capsule and we're setting the capsule half height, and we're driving that animation with this timeline. So it's going from that 96 to the 48. It's just making it smaller. So far, if we get rid of this logic here, if all we're concerned about is just when we start pressing that crouch button, you could see what happens. I press Control and we crouch down. If I press Control again, nothing happens. If I let go of Control, nothing happens. This is where we're at so far. So let's continue our logic here. We have started, but what about completed? This is when we release the crouch button. So let's go ahead and look at what happens here. The first thing it's going to do, well, the only thing it's actually going to do is it's going to launch a custom event. And this custom event is called Crouch Clear Event. All right, so let's talk about what this is. This is a separate thing we have going on down here. So when I let go of crouch, it's going to come down here and launch straight into this event, Crouch Clear Event. When we launch this event, the first thing we do is we check if our crouch is clear. So that's what I'm referring to on Crouch Clear. I'm checking if there's anything above us and if we're able to stand back up. So check crouch clear is a function. So if we just go into that, you can just double click it if you want. You could see what the logic is here. Here's our input. So this is as we enter the function or the group, however you want to think about it. And this is our return node or our output. So we're coming in here when we launch that event, and we're leaving here, and we're leaving with one little bit of information. What's that information? It's whether or not our player can stand. So how are we checking that? Well, we're doing what's called a line trace. And in this case, we're doing a line trace by channel. So what does that mean? It means we basically have a start point and an end point for a line. And if anything in a specific channel interrupts that start and end point in that line, then it is going to return a value right here. So basically it means that something is above us. If it returns a value, then we cannot stand. So if I just plugged this straight in here, that wouldn't make sense because there's something above us and it's saying there's something above us and we can stand. So we're just putting a not bool here. So to get that, you just drag out of a Boolean like this, and you could just type it in not Boolean. All right, so that's how I got that. So basically, if this is detecting anything above us, then we can not stand. All right, and if it's not detecting anything above us, then naturally this will be set so we can stand. So how are we detecting that? Well, we need three things in this little equation here. We need a start point, we need an end point, and we need a trace channel, which is something I'll show you in our project settings in just a moment. But for the start point, what are we getting as a start point? Where can we start to draw this line? Well, remember in our viewport here, remember this capsule component? I felt like that was as good an object as any that we can start with. So I just dragged out the capsule component, all right? And from there, I can get the world location. All right, so you could just type in get world location. And that's just basically finding out where in the world this capsule component is. And that goes directly to our start point for our line trace. So to make a line, you need 2 points. We need the start and the end. We can't start and end at the same point. That's not a line. That's just going to be a single point in space, and it's not going to detect anything. So how do we get our end point? Well, we can actually start from the start point And then all I'm doing is off of this, I just type in the plus sign, and we are simply adding. We're adding what's called a vector, which is a series or a collection of numbers. In this case, it's X, Y, and Z. So all I'm doing here is I'm adding a vector, and I'm adding 100, which is 100 centimeters on Z. The Z-axis, of course, is up and down. So we are searching positive 100, so we're shooting a line up 100 centimeters as the endpoint. So basically, we're taking our little collision cylinder here, and we're firing a line 100 meters or 100 centimeters above us, and we're seeing if there's anything there. If there is something there, then we cannot stand. If there's nothing there, then this is going to be set so we can stand. How are we checking a specific object? Well, that's where the trace by channel comes in. We have something called a trace channel, and we can set that up in our project settings in just a moment, but these are basically collision channels. So in this trace channel, I have something called a crouch trace channel, because I don't want to just search for any object above us. I want to make sure it's an object that blocks the ability to stand up. It's a crouch trace object. So to create that, you could just go to Edit and Project Settings. I have that open in a tab right here. And in your project settings, you can search for channel. Now I have a few different channels in this project. It's just called trace channels. I have one called Interact, and then I added one called Crouch. So to create a new trace channel, let's just create one called Test. It has what's called a default response. So basically this is saying when you add a new object into the world, by default, what should be enabled for this particular channel. If it's set to block, then that will block all of the collisions. So it's basically going to acknowledge that it's there. If you set it to ignore, then everything that you add to the scene by default will not be indicated as this test trace channel. So just set it to ignore, because I want to individually add something that I want to be in this particular trace channel. Hopefully that'll make sense in just a minute. So let's hit accept. We have our new little test channel here. And if we compile back in our first person character in this function here with the line trace by channel, we could set this to test. You can see how that's appeared now. Now we have the trace channel test. However, I'm going to keep this at crouch. Let's just go ahead and delete that test one that I created. I just want to show you there. And let's look at how we identify an object as this crouch trace channel. So let's go back to our first person map, and let's take a look at this cube here, and I'll show you what I've done. So in my cube here, we have, under all of the settings, I just search for collision. All right, so just search for collision. This is in the details. And you'll get some collision presets. You might have to expand this. This by default is set to default. We're going to want to set this to custom because we want to custom identify what's going on here. So as you can see, we have our trace channels right here, and we have that ignore, overlap, and block. So if it's set to ignore, this is basically not a crouch trace channel object. If we set this to block, then what that's going to do, all of these should be set to block, is those are now identifiable by that line trace by channel, by this node that we have right here. All right. So this is going to, as it fires off that line from our collision component, it's going to now identify these blocks. And I'll test before and after just to show you what's going on here. This block, for example, does not have that enabled. If we went to our collision settings, it just set to default. We could go to custom. By default, these are set to ignore. So this is not going to be the crouch trace channel. All right, so let's just set this back to default for this one. We don't need to worry about that. And this is what we're looking at here. So that is the logic for checking if there's an object above us. And if we want to test this, we could print a string. Oh, let's see. This let's not do it here. I'll show you in just a second where we could do that. Okay, we're good. We have determined whether we can stand up or not. Let's go back here. So when we let go of the crouch button, it is going to launch this custom event, which is going to go to this function and find out, can we stand up, yes or no? And I'll show you why this is in its own little function here, or its own little event, in just a moment. But that's the important thing, is we're determining, can we stand up, yes or no? What we're doing from that function is we've added a branch node. So to add a branch node, you simply drag out and press B. There's a shortcut there. And for the condition, we're just deciding, can we stand up? So can we stand up? Yes, we can stand up. What are we going to do if we can stand up? Let's look at that path first. Yes, we can stand up. There's nothing above us. Well, first thing we want to do is set our max walk speed back to 400. So we want to start walking at a normal speed again. And we want to set the player can jump. So basically we're doing the inverse of what we did when we started crouching. We're just reversing that. So we're speeding up and we're making sure that our player can jump again. And then we are reversing that timeline. Remember that crouch timeline where we started at a normal height and we crouched down? We animated our, what was it called? Our capsule half height. We could just simply reverse that. That's another cool thing about these timelines, is you could just plug it into the reverse and now it's going to play that backwards. So we'll start crouching and we'll animate to full size again. And yeah, that is going into the same set capsule half height because it's reversing that and we're standing back up. So that is the logic. If we can stand, then it will basically make the character walk a normal speed, make sure we can jump again, and it will animate our set capsule half height back to the full size. So what that looks like when we play, there's nothing above us here. Crouch, stand up. It'll happen even if we're standing below an object that is not the crouch line trace, all right, or the crouch trace channel, like I showed you. So we could just crouch, let go, and we stand up. So far, pretty straightforward, pretty easy. However, this is where things get a little bit tricky. What happens if we cannot stand? Well, we could just leave this at nothing. Nothing happens if we can't stand. Let me show you the problem with this. So I'm just going to leave this false empty. Don't worry about this. We're going to get into this in a second. So just leave the false empty. And we'll crouch underneath this and we'll let go of crouch. And we can't stand. That's great. All right, we're not standing up. But when we walk out of this, we stay slow, we stay crouched down. That's not ideal. We would have to press crouch again and let go, and then it would go ahead and stand up. But I would like to let go while we're underneath this, and when we step out of it, automatically stand up. Well, how in the world do we do that? Basically, we need to continue checking what's going on. We need to continue checking to see if we can stand up. So that's where this retriggerable delay comes in handy, and that's why we're doing this on its own custom event. If we had this logic just on the completed, this actually ignores the timing, the delay that we have here because of the nature of this input action crouch. So we needed to put it on its own event over here. And what's going to happen? If we cannot stand, then we need to go through a loop to check again if we can stand. And we can do that every duration. So to show you what's going on here, let me just add a print string right here, all right? And for the, let's see, for the message, let's just say, can't stand, all right? We can't stand up. So from our false, we cannot stand up, we're going to do a retriggerable delay. So this is going to feed back into itself in a loop. And why is this a loop? And why is it okay to do a loop here? Well, we're going to check every duration. So in this case, every 0.3 seconds, we're going to check, can we stand up? No, we can't stand up. Check again. Can you stand up? No, check again, check again. The reason we're doing this is because As you can see here, if I get rid of this again, when we crouch and when we exit the overhang here, we exit our little tunnel, what's happening is this has no reason to check again if it can stand up. In fact, it's not going to check again until you press crouch again. So what we're doing here is if we cannot stand, we're re-triggering a delay and we're going through this loop. And it's not an infinite loop because if it's false, it'll go back here. If it's false, it'll go back here. But if it gets a true, it's going to go over here and we're not going to touch this again. So this is what that looks like. We have this can't stand right here, the print string. So keep an eye on the top left of our screen. It should be printing that every 0.3 seconds that we cannot stand up. All right, so let's just take a look here. Let's crouch. Oops. Let's crouch, walk under here, let go, can't stand, and every 0.3 seconds it's checking. Can we stand up? Nope. All right, stay crouched. Can we stand up? Nope. All right. As soon as we leave that, it stops. So you'll notice the way I'm doing this, I'm not doing this on tick. There's an event on tick that we could do. Actually, I don't have one here. Oh, I have one up here. All right. So I'm not doing this on tick. The reason for that is I don't want to check this all the time. You know, if I'm walking around over here and I'm not crouching, I'm just doing something else in the game, I don't want to be checking if I can stand up on that 0.3 seconds. I only want to check if I tried to stand up underneath something and it determined I could not stand up. Then when I can stand up, I just wanted to clear that out. I don't want it to be thinking about that every tick. So a tick is just something that happens continuously in the game. It's based on time in this instance. It could be based on frame rate. In this case, it's just every 0.3 seconds. If you're really worried about optimization, you can make this as low as something like maybe even 1 second. I wouldn't go lower or higher than that just because then it starts to feel unresponsive. So this is just checking once a second, can you stand up? And if I step out of this, eventually it'll stand up. But yeah, it's just a little bit, it's a little slow. If they catch that at the wrong time, they could be waiting up to 1 second to feel that responsiveness. So I just like to keep this at 0.3, 0.4, something like that. And now, as you can see, we crouch down, we stand up. It's going to check, can you stand up? Nope, 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 until you leave that and it'll stand up. So that's everything. If you just want to skip to the end here and take a little screenshot of what I have going on, let me show you the node setup here. Can we full screen this? No. I'm sure there's a way to full screen it. I don't know the button. I tried F11. Let me know if there's a way. I'm going to pause right here. Take a screenshot. If you're on a Windows device, that's just Shift Windows S for screenshot. You can take a little screenshot there. Yeah, take a second to take a screenshot here. I'll jump into this function in just a second. All right, hopefully you have a screenshot. Let's go in here and screenshot this one as well. And just for good measure, let's go into our timeline. So you see what's going on here. Again, that timeline is just triggered for the set capsule half height. And then let's go into the project settings. You can search for trace channel if you really want to narrow it down. Search for trace channel. And there you go. You can take a look at my settings for this crouch trace channel that I added. And the last piece of the puzzle was this actual cube that I had. The collision settings. You set this to custom. And for crouch, it is set to block. So it is recognizing that as something that's blocking. If we set this to ignore, what's going to happen is when we play our game, we crouch. This is not going to recognize that object. So when we try to stand up, it's just going to stand up and we're going to collide with that. And we actually can't move around. So that's not ideal. That's why we have this whole setup in the first place. So let's set that crouch back to block. We'll do one more test. Crouch, let go, and we're checking if we can stand up until we leave, and we're good. So final thing, let's just go here. Let's delete this print string. Rather than pressing delete, you can press Shift Delete, and it'll keep the connection that you have. And there you go. That is the full setup. Hopefully you found that helpful and insightful. Please go consider supporting my Patreon, RileyB3D. That's patreon.com/RileyB3D. I have tiers for as low as just a few bucks a month, and you can support this channel and get perks like early access to tutorials and my entire asset library. You can just go download assets. So I might as well pull that up if we're talking about it. So yeah, there you go, patreon.com/RileyB3D. We have early access to a lot of tutorials that haven't even launched yet. And if you were to go to my shop up at the top here, you could just click shop. As a supporter, if you support the second tier, then you get access to all of this for free. You could just download whatever you want. And while I'm thinking about it, I will make this project file available for this little tutorial just on the Patreon. And I'll make that available to the lowest tier. So if you're watching this, if you don't want to go through everything I just set up, if you just want to get this, then I'll make this project file available for you. All right, that's enough for me. Thanks for watching this. And please go support the Patreon. I will see you in the next one.